Jody mentioned, I am a college class of 2012. I did a minor in the business school. So that was really formative as I thought about my career. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I also want to kind of go back to learning a little bit more about this audience. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. So I just would love to know what year at Georgetown you are, just so I can get a sense of who we're talking to and maybe how far into the process you are thinking about what's next. Cool. I'll just give another few seconds, but so far it seems like mostly upperclassmen, juniors, and seniors. And I normally would have then asked a poll about what school within Georgetown you are, but maybe you could just drop it in the chat and I'll take a quick peek at that. So I'll end that poll there. I've got about 40% juniors and seniors. So that's really good to know. I'm gonna move that back here. Cool. MSB, college, SFS. Yes, I was a international relations and Chinese language double major. So I took a lot of classes with friends from the SFS, and then with my minor in the MSB, got to spend lots of time in that beautiful building, which just finished before I left. So feel a lot of kinship to all of the schools. So, okay, pretty good mix across all of the different schools at Georgetown. That's awesome. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey. I'm really passionate about non-engineering roles in tech, and I specify non-engineering versus non-technical because, as you'll see, there's actually quite a range of technical knowledge and technical enthusiasm that you have to have with any role in this industry. It is the tech industry, but I specify non-engineering because I did not study coding, I did not study programming, other than self-learning some front-end design when I was designing my blog way back in the day. I can't build you an app. So, you know, I grew up in the Bay Area, and before college, I was going to school with a lot of people who actually did want to become engineers. So I think for those of you who are worried about not having that deep technical background, I was very aware of the differences between myself and my friends who loved history and English class and those who spent all their time in the robotics lab. We thought very differently about problems, and it was really great just to see how our different strengths could be applied to different problems. I then went to Georgetown. I think hopefully many of you can relate to why I chose Georgetown. I wanted to be really mission oriented and really have a big picture sense of the world and how I could apply myself to influencing the world around me. My time at Georgetown also made me extremely values driven and really taught me to focus on integrating all the different beliefs and passions that I had into my career and into my life. And I think that's stayed with me throughout my career. Now, I think there's always an inflection point along the journey because while I was a junior and senior at Georgetown, I was thinking about whether I wanted to go to law school or not, because that was kind of the goal when I had started college. And as I was doing my research, more and more I was learning that law school was not really ticking the box for all the things that I was really excited about and things that I was particularly good at. All of you are extremely bright or you wouldn't be at Georgetown. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I think that's part of the challenge of figuring out what path you want to follow post-college. Now, around this time, I stumbled my way into a Deloitte Consulting seminar. I think many of my friends were interested in banking and consulting at the time, so I thought I would check it out. And that led me to my first job out of Georgetown, which was in consulting. There, I really got to hone in on my problem-solving skills and learning about my strengths as a professional, working with executive leaders and having to be able to up-level myself. Just a few years out of college and then talking to people who were very senior in their careers, I had to learn very quickly how to lead with data, how to gain trust quickly, and get a lot of collaborative buy-in for the projects that I wanted to succeed in. And this was great. I spent several years in consulting, and during that time, the questions never really went away around, how am I applying my skill set? How am I applying the things that I'm really good at to my job? And I think this is a question that you'll continue to ask yourself as you progress in your career. So for those of you who don't feel like you know exactly what you want to do, or you don't know if you're choosing the right thing right after college, the good news is you will keep revisiting that question over and over again. And toward the latter stage of my time in consulting, I started asking myself those very questions. And that led me to pursue an MBA for a few reasons. One was that I had an inkling that I wanted to actually go back to my roots in the tech industry. I knew I always had an interest in marketing, but I was identifying a couple gaps personally, in my awareness of the business world and specific skill sets that I wanted to build. So for me, the right path was to go to grad school first. For many of my friends, they were able to make career transitions without that. So I think the MBA for me was really wonderful, and I was lucky to be able to take 2 years off to commit to that, but it's not something that you have to do necessarily to then transition into tech. So that's my little caveat for how the MBA kind of functioned in my career journey. During my MBA, I got a chance to sharpen and formalize my strategic thinking skills and really become a marketer. I had done elements of marketing and product marketing in my previous roles, but having the vocabulary and the tools, as well as just the dedicated time to research trends in the tech industry, was really what helped me then make the leap. I got an internship at Microsoft as an MBA intern and was invited to come back full time. And that's where I've been since, specifically as a product marketer within our Microsoft's identity and security space. Now, a couple of takeaways from this, besides getting to know me and what I'm about to tell you, is that it's really important to reflect on what you're good at and what you're interested in. I think a lot of you are doing that reflective work now, but also to think about bridging your interest to the things that you need to learn. There's always going to be things that you're going to want to do, but it may take a couple steps to get there. And I realized that when I was evaluating my transition from consulting to tech, especially as somebody who doesn't have an engineering skill set, I knew it was going to require a few more tools in my tool belt to be able to make that leap. And lastly, being realistic about your job options and making sure that you're not just following the crowd. And I say that because product roles within tech have become really popular in the last few years, especially as I think there's always kind of a cyclical trend. When I was in school, banking was the really hot thing to get into. So everybody was applying to, the top banks. And then it was sort of like a consulting wave. And recently I've noticed a huge amount of interest in product management, product marketing. And I think it's a really reasonable thing to want to explore if all your friends are doing it. But it's also good to remember that because it is so popular, you have to be really tuned in to why you're pursuing that role. It's going to be extremely competitive, which means the work you're going to put in should ideally be towards something that you actually, would be interested in doing. And so with that whole caveat, I'd like to talk a little bit here about what are the common roles in tech, as well as really at a high level, how recruiting and interviewing work for some of these roles. So, oh, that was too fast. So before I chat about, let me see if I can launch the next poll. Before I chat about roles, I'd love to know, where are most of you in your tech recruiting journey? Are you starting to explore, or do you already have a sense of what roles you're going to go after? And it could be multiple answers, actually. looks like it's a kind of an even split between just starting to learn and then definitely recruiting, but trying to discern what the roles are and what they mean. So I think that's a really good place to be, as well as those who are recruiting for tech among other industries. So I can talk a little bit about that too. I do think that every industry has a very particular recruiting process and flavor of how the interviews work. So it's definitely best to narrow that down as much as possible, just so you're spending all your time preparing to be successful, ideally in like the one you want. But if you are kind of splitting efforts, my only advice there is try to keep the function at least similar enough between industries. So if you're going to interview for tech and you want to say do marketing or sales, ideally if you're looking at another industry, it's also a marketing or sales function. So you have similar stories that you can pull across the industries. It starts to get really difficult if you're interviewing for both different roles and different industries, because not only will you have to learn a whole new language, but you'll also have to reconstruct your story for how you have the skills to do the job in that industry. Cool, and it looks like most of you want to recruit for tech, but you're just trying to learn about the roles. So that's going to be what we talk about next. So again, the tech industry is really not a monolith. There's a huge amount of disparity between what we sometimes refer to as FANGAM companies, or Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and mid-sized companies as well as startups. And the size of the company can hugely influence what the role is, how much differentiation there is between your responsibilities and someone else's. Additionally, the culture also can influence how much your role looks day to day. But in general, I like to think about non-engineering roles on a spectrum of how close are you to the product and how close are you to the customer. So starting on the far left, on the product-facing side, the product manager, I would say, is the person who works most closely with the engineers. If we think about engineers as the folks who are building the product, whether that's a B2B product or a B2C product, the product manager is the one who is typically setting priorities for what they're building. They're gathering requirements, similar to how an architect might be working with a customer to make sure that they then get the right drawings. They are responsible often for the profit and loss or managing the cost of the building process. And they are often called on to figure out the vision for what's coming next. So not only what are they building, is it on time, but what's coming next. So they're probably the closest to the person actually doing the engineering work. Now, moving a little bit more to the right, the product marketing manager, this is the role I'm in, so I know most about this, is sometimes also engaged with the engineering process, will also be deeply involved with understanding the product roadmap, but is also has to keep an eye out on the market by nature. In my role on a daily basis, I'm working with our sales folks. I'm working with research to understand market conditions. I'm working with analysts as well as press to make sure that we're advancing a vision of the product that we can then sell to the market. So my role has to be in between, but is a little bit closer to product than I would say a salesperson, because as we move to the right, you'll see a program manager, which isn't a role that exists in every company, but I put it here just to show that there are people, especially in bigger companies, whose jobs may be to literally run the entire, to run various business programs. For example, we have folks that are in charge of licensing and managing how a licensing program gets advanced to the field. or our salespeople. They might be in charge of monitoring analytics to see how it's performing and then bring that information back. So there's a lot of, so program managers are, really working on the operations of the company. If they think about that as a more operations oriented function. In some cases, at least within Microsoft, a program manager may also be a little bit more embedded in our analytics, looking at, how a particular product is performing from a financial perspective. They may work very closely with both finance as well as business planners to make sure that we're not just building the right product, but we're pricing or packaging it in a way that makes sense. Moving a little bit closer to the customer side, you then have business development as well as partner development managers. These are people that are cultivating partnerships with other companies, other products that might integrate with our products. They might be, cultivating other types of business arrangements just to find ways of, again, generating sales. As you move more to the right, the focus is going to be a lot more about how the company makes money, whereas toward the left side of the equation, it's going to be a lot more focused on what we're building and how we're positioning ourselves against competitors. So the business partners that I work with, or the folks who are in charge of managing business partnerships, they tend to have a lot of questions like, can we bring in a consulting company to help us sell our products? And how can we train them? Can we do interviews with this other product that's integrated with our product because they would like to co-brand or use our logo on something that they're presenting? So those are some of the questions that they think about, or at least how they interact with me as a marketer. And then you have your sales function as well as customer success functions. And the difference between those that I like to think about is sales is in charge of getting the prospect and getting them to buy. And then post-purchase, customer success takes over and is responsible for making sure that they are onboarded to the product, that they know how to use it, that they're having a good time with it, and that they hopefully are coming back to the company and saying, yes, I will attest that your product is great. I will do an evidence story with you that you can share with other customers or other prospects. And so the sales and customer success folks are probably the people along this spectrum that really understand the customer best in terms of spending the most time with them and owning that relationship. So all these different roles, we all have the same goal in mind. The end goal is to help the company succeed, make money, win against competitors. And so there's a lot of similarity sometimes between the priorities that we have. But at the end of the day, the ownership for each dimension of that relationship to product or customer has to be very clear. At the end of the day, the product manager and engineering own the product vision, whereas account teams and sales, they own the relationship with the customer. So I, as a marketer, depend a lot on them to tell me how folks are reacting to my marketing content, if I can borrow their customer for some feedback, but I don't own that relationship. So I have to be very respectful when sales folks say, my client's really busy and no, they cannot participate in this event. And likewise, as the marketer, I own the product positioning and messaging. So if I see people trying to create their own material that is advancing a very different positioning for the product, that's where I start to get concerned, because it means that we're not aligned, and it means that the story is starting to get a little bit funny. So that's usually where, as a marketer, I have to help reel it back in. So that's kind of a very high level view of the roles. And really, it's not really a line, it's really more of a circle. Like, we all depend on one another to get the information that we need. And if you're interested in any particular one of these, I would advise doing the most research on that one part of the circle. But having some awareness of how it interacts with all these other roles is going to be really helpful as well, because as we'll talk about in when it comes to recruiting and interviewing, many of the questions you'll be asked, or many of the ways that you'll be evaluated for culture, is how you collaborate with other roles and how you deal with the fact that you you need to be able to influence the people around you who have very different functions, but you don't necessarily have any authority or power to make them follow your vision. So I say that ownership is clear, but in reality, it's not always apparent. While I am accountable for the product marketing strategy for my product area, I can't necessarily go to everyone and say, I'm the product marketing manager, you have to listen to me. So ultimately, you have to rely on really good relationships and really close relationships to make sure that you're in the conversations you need to be. So hopefully that overview will be helpful as you think about preparing and discerning what roles you might want to interview for. And I want to take a pause actually to pull up the chat if there's any questions. Okay, I don't see anything yet, but and I didn't prepare a poll for this, but if in the chat you could maybe drop what types of roles you might be interested in. I'd love to spend a little bit more time during our Q&A to chat about those roles, any insights that I have on preparing for those. Okay, product manager and PMM for product focused roles. Cool. BDR. Yeah, so I think the business partnership and development is one that not a lot of people are aware of, but especially as the market gets more complex, there's more of a need for companies to figure out how they can grow by bringing in both integration partners, so ways that your technology can integrate with others, as well as implementation partners like consulting firms that are doing the actual work of helping customers adopt a certain technology. Anytime somebody downloads Zoom or Microsoft Teams, like there has to be somebody on the back end that's making sure that the organization or the school or the company knows how to download it, how to train people. So there's a lot of, I think, growth in those kinds of roles in cultivating that. PM and project manager and product manager. So yeah, I see project manager also come up. That's sometimes its own distinct role because these projects are so huge sometimes and can be a lot for any one person to manage. So project management is often woven throughout all of these roles. And I think having strong project management skills is definitely a number one thing that will make you successful, especially if you want to be on the product side. But again, there's also people who specialize full-time in being a project manager or an expert on the agile project management method, which is called Scrum Masters. So if you are really passionate about keeping people organized and keeping the trains running and charts and updating things, you might love that too. Now, I think a question that comes up a lot, I'm not seeing it in the chat, but a question that I do hear quite a bit sometimes is, do I need to know how to program, or do I need to know how to code in order to be a product manager? And I will say again, it varies very much on the product you're working on. It's, I think, always more helpful so if you think about one of the goals of a product manager is to set the vision for the product. If you have a really good understanding of the market and your competitors and what customers need, you can actually do a good job of basically putting together a set of requirements that you want your engineers to build that will end up looking like a good product. Now, in terms of your relationship with engineers, I think sometimes when it's a more technically complex product, having an understanding of how they build it will help you gain credibility with the engineers. On the other hand, if your product is maybe a little bit more intuitive, or maybe it's maybe something that doesn't require a whole lot of personal experience having built things yourself, you may not need to have that depth of knowledge, but it ultimately comes down to winning the respect and credibility with your engineering partners. They're, if they tell you something is going to take 5 days to build, how much, do you trust that is really going to come out of your experience, knowing how to build it, or at least having seen it many, many times? So I see a lot of very successful PMs that work really well with engineers without having any kind of engineering background, but they also have experience of using a lot of products. So they kind of know when they're getting yanked around. Another good question is, a lot of students really enjoy problem solving, end up going into consulting. So what roles entail more problem solving? I would say it's really, what kinds of problems do you want to solve? So kind of starting from the right-hand side this time, if you're working on customer success kind of roles, the problems you're going to be solving are actually almost identical to the ones you would be working on as a consultant that's in some kind of technology adoption function. And the problems are, how do I get my client to onboard as many of their employees as possible to this product? How do I train? How do I communicate? And how do I get people to love and support this thing that they've bought so that executives look good? So it's that one, I would say, is the most similar to my experience of having been a consultant that works on technology projects. If you're in sales, the problems you're solving are your customers' problems. If they tell you, I want to buy this product, but I have this issue with the price, or I have this issue with how licensing works, or the product is good, but we have XYZ issues that don't really meet our needs, then it becomes your problem to have to scream about solving those problems to all these other functions. So you really become the advocate for your customer, and you need to be creative about ways to land the deal that benefit both your customer as well as your own company and your goals. Business and partnership development, I think the kinds of problems can also be very similar to that of a consultant, because you're really trying to do a lot of negotiation and you're trying to satisfy a lot of stakeholders who, again, may have very different priorities. So some examples of that could be, you're trying to bring in a new partner, but that partner may not be able to do as much promotion or marketing on their end because of budget reasons, but you think they're still valuable from another strategic point of view. So how do you bring in all your partners so that they're all sort of being treated fairly in accordance to the value they bring your company? And how do you give them enough sometimes without as much budget as you might have for a different partner? You're similar to sales and accounts. Actually, you're doing a lot of just relationship management. You're trying to make sure that they're happy with the support they're getting from you as a partner, and that you're happy with how your partnership is going. A lot of partnerships fall apart because some partners may start working with other competitors in a way that you don't find beneficial to your company. So you're always having to monitor that and making sure that there's enough trust there. Program managers, again, because it's such a general bucket, it's kind of hard to say that they all work on any specific type of problem. But if you're a business program manager, again, you might be really deep in analytics, trying to pull data that's answering the questions of the executives that you're working for. If you're in finance, again, it's going to be very much oriented toward finance type of problems. Whereas another type of program manager that I should mention is, in some companies, a program manager is synonymous with being a product manager. So sometimes it's good to make sure you know what type of program or product they're talking about. I know at Microsoft, we refer to product managers as program managers. So another good thing to clarify if they mean a business program or if they mean a product program. In product marketing, the kinds of questions and problems that I'm solving on a daily basis are, how do we compete with our competitors? Do I have the research I need to create messaging and a positioning framework that makes sense? Do I have customer evidence? And product managers, they're really trying to figure out, are they building the right product? Do they have UI, UX research that supports that they're building the right things? Are customers happy? How do they solve technical challenges? So it's all problem solving. It's just kind of what problems you're interested in. Going through some of the questions, coming out of university, is it most useful to get experience at a larger company to gain skills and experience, or going straight into a more specific company? So that's a great question. And I think there are so many paths into tech. If that's your ultimate goal, you could, it's really up to you to think about what skills and what experiences do you need first. I think in my case, I wasn't entirely certain of what industry I wanted to go into after Georgetown, which is why consulting was such a great springboard for me to explore and still gain professional skills and think about it. But for those of you who are really keen on going into a specific industry or role, you don't have to do that detour. That said, I do find that one of the benefits of working at a larger company is that you get to see how things are structured, and you get a really up close look at what are the processes that are maybe typical for that field. And then if you go to a smaller company or a startup where there is no structure, you then know how to replicate it. One of the challenges of friends that I have who went straight into smaller companies where they didn't feel like they had as much support was also that they lacked mentorship in some cases, and in others, they didn't have, they didn't learn or gain a lot of confidence that the processes they were establishing were the right ones. And I think some of that is imposter syndrome. Like, again, like not a lot of this is rocket science. You can read a lot about it. You can self-study. There's plenty of resources out there, but sometimes it does take watching somebody else do it, or a manager who can kind of show you the ropes to give you that internal confidence. So that is one difference, I think, between sometimes a smaller, more focused company and then a more larger institution. Again, sometimes a large institution may not get it right either. There's plenty of dysfunction. So there's really no hard and fast rule, I would say. Another great question, how do you build strong networks with people who may not be in an engineering or technical role? Anything unique about networking in tech? So I think you can really do a lot of searching based on role title. So if you look at all the ones I have on this slide, if you search for people at specific companies who have these titles, you'll get a sense of who's out there and who might already be in your network that you could reach out to. I always recommend having a warm introduction. So, please personalize your introductions, or make sure you get a referral from someone. That's going to get you the best shot of getting a response. But yeah, if you're looking to meet people who have these titles, also look at your local area product management groups or product marketing groups. I know there's plenty on LinkedIn around that are just groups designed for product people to get together and commiserate or share advice or talk about how their roles are similar or different in their company. So you can actually learn a lot by being part of those groups. I think there's also plenty of newsletters out there, which I'm happy to share in the chat after this, or I'll post it on my LinkedIn so you can learn a little bit more about that. Yeah, I think entry level jobs. So that's a whole separate question. There I would say just don't be afraid when they ask for 1 to 2 years of experience, because I think there's tech, as with all industries, there's a little bit of experience inflation when it comes to writing job descriptions. So um, there are a lot of programs that are designed for people without engineering experiences to become product managers in particular. Some larger companies will target recent grads or people who are maybe a year out of college. So those are good things to look for too. Is the industry is having a reckoning right now around how we bring people into the tech pipeline. And so looking for those specific programs that might be a good on-ramp in, besides kind of throwing your hat in the ring for some of those other entry-level jobs, could be a good way to go. Cool. I'm just looking at the questions. There's a lot of good ones, and I think some of them we'll be able to tackle at the end. I think I'm seeing a lot of questions now about recruiting and interviews and networking in general. So I'm going to just transition to my next talking points around recruiting and interviewing. So again, I have to caveat that every company's timeline is really different. And I know Jody mentioned that one of the most popular questions is, when does cycle start and how do I get on it? And I am sorry to say that it's going to look super different for every single company that you talk to. I think the easiest split is first just to address on-campus recruiting versus off-campus recruiting. We all know off-campus recruiting is a wild, wild west. And in tech, the trend is, including from when I was in my MBA program, is more and more of them are following an off-campus pattern because it allows companies to react more real time to demands and hiring needs. And unlike some banking and consulting cycles, it's a little bit more challenging for them to hire up front and then figure out where to slot candidates into. So that's my own hunch for why there is so much more variance in the cycle than for other industries. And so if you're really targeting tech, my advice is the more tailored you can whittle your list down, the better. Pick a handful of companies, or at least a segment of tech that you want to recruit for, and you just have to do so much homework to know that you're not missing any deadlines. And I think that in this industry, it requires a lot of proactive following up, as well as patience and confidence. First, on the being proactive piece, I mentioned previously that in many of the roles I talked about, you have to influence decisions that you may not necessarily have authority over any decision. And I think because of that, the industry really, as a whole, likes to try to find people who are going to be proactive about seeking out opportunities that may not necessarily be handed out or may not be easily kind of prescribed or pulled off the internet. And so as a candidate, you really help present yourself best when you are doing your own outreach, when you're following up on any questions you have. Especially for startups and smaller companies, they may not have a huge dedicated recruitment program to find you. So the more you can do to show interest and knowledge of their products and that product space, the more you're really differentiating yourself as somebody who's passionate and cares. And that's, definitely one way that you can help stand out is by doing that specific research. It also requires a lot of patience, again, because it's anytime it's off campus, they're not going to have the same cycle of getting back to candidates who've applied and letting them know what's happened. So sometimes you may not hear back from a recruiter for a little while, or you might feel like you're dropping things into a black hole. And I think that's where having the patience to wait it out, but also the proactive instinct to, if you're really interested, I'm going to follow up. I think that's going to really help, is trying to take some control over the situation. And then lastly, I think just having the confidence to keep going with tech. One of the hardest things to do is to wait very late in the school year to keep interviewing, and it really sucks. I'm going to be really honest. It really sucks to be the last one of your group of friends that's like, I'm still interviewing or I'm still looking. And from my MBA experience, I know a lot of opportunities for my peers did not open up until the spring. They know that you're not going to graduate until spring or summer. And for a lot of reasons, especially smaller companies, they just are not in a position where they can hire, half a year out from when you would start. So I don't know how things are going to look this year. I know it's unprecedented in every single way. So I cannot say this with any kind of definitive comfort or anything, but I suspect that more opportunities will open up at the beginning of the year through the spring, just because a lot of fiscal years start over in January. And that's when people will be planning and doing their hiring plans. So if it follows at all, like what I've experienced when I was in my MBA program doing campus recruiting, I think it's going to bear well to be patient if you're looking for anything in particular. I see a question about specific resume format. I don't think there is a specific resume template. I used whatever school template I was given at Georgetown and at Northwestern when I was recruiting, just because I could use it for both on-campus and off-campus interviews, and it was fine. I think the more importantly is making sure that you're highlighting the impact of every single bullet on your resume. It doesn't matter that you cram as many projects that you've worked on there as it is that you're very clear about what the outcome of those projects or internships or jobs. If you have like non-traditional elements of your resume that you really want to shine, I do think that's where in tech you can sometimes add a little bit of personality to what they're looking for. So if you have a photography portfolio, or if you do, if you're really passionate about your volunteering work, finding ways to integrate that into your resume, I find has started a lot of good conversations as I network and interview in the tech field. Then it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt is what I'll say. People love to see personality. They love to know you're a real person. And I do think that the tech field is one that generally respects that people bring their full authentic selves to work. Not every company, but I do find most companies are on the leading front of wanting to see some personality. There's another good question actually about transferring roles between roles at a tech company. So it is possible. I would say if there's a role that you think is more accessible at this stage of your career and you just want to get a foot in the door to get into tech, do that. You can make that transition down the line as you build more pieces in your puzzle or in your toolkit that get you a little bit closer to that next role. It does take some time, and I think it just takes some strategic thinking about what experiences you would need to add, or how can you stretch that role you're in to look a little bit closer to whatever role you're actually trying to get into. There are rotational programs. I don't think it's as common as with, say, consumer packaged goods or other programs that I've seen in other industries. So yeah, I think it's not as common from what I've seen. They'll typically recruit for a specific function, and then you might do rotation within that function to learn if there's a specific product area or dimension of that function that you want to focus on. But I haven't seen too many where you get to do a little bit of, say, marketing and a little bit of field. Let me see what else. If you're typically looking to go into sales, do you need previous internship experience in the areas, or are they good about taking on newcomers? I don't know as much about the sales function, but I think, coming out of campus, I think most companies are pretty aware that you only have so much time to gain prior experience. So if they're recruiting for sales, I think they're really just recruiting for a personality that is proactive and eager and excited to work with people and work with customers. So if you see an entry level job in that space, I would just jump on it. I would say, as long as it's something that you've researched and you're really excited about, I wouldn't let the caveats about needing prior experience scare you too much. Plus, everything is sales. I think you can make an argument that you've been doing sales in many other aspects of your life. Yes, and there is a great list of leadership development and rotational programs that Jody just dropped in the chat. So really quickly on interviewing, before I get back to questions, interviewing is going to vary very widely based on role. They're going to ask you a mix of behavioral questions as well as case questions. And case questions will be much more function dependent, I find. But the behavioral questions are really ones that you can prepare for regardless of what role you're targeting, and really regardless of what industry you're interviewing for. I find that my preparation for tech and to answer behavioral questions specifically has been so useful because this is really, in my opinion, how you should be preparing for any kind of interview question. And so an example of a behavioral question is going to be something like, tell me about a time when you had to deal with conflict, or tell me about a time when you needed to make a difficult decision and how you did that. So these are going to be questions that probe at how you make decisions, what are your leadership strengths, what are your weaknesses, and how do you approach problem solving. Whereas case questions will typically revolve around how you apply your problem solving to a specific problem. And so I think if you're in a stage of, I want to prep, I don't really know what role yet, but I want to get started, I think behavioral questions are a great one to begin with. A really good response to a behavioral question will follow what I've heard of as the STAR template. So really starting with a short description of the situation, talking about, talking about really what you did as quickly as possible, but then really spending the most time reflecting on the outcomes and the results. So just like with the resume, I recommend making sure that you focus on impact. I think in a good response to an interview question, you're also focusing mostly on your impact and your reflection of what you did and how you've learned from it. And these should really be stories that are rooted in past examples. I think the best examples that you have don't necessarily have to be from your professional experience. They can be from working on academic projects, it can be from internships, but they can also be from your personal life. And I think this is another area where you can differentiate yourself from your peers, because you all have such unique personal experiences and have different points of view on life. Strategically, there are ways you can talk about those in an interview that are appropriate, but also are going to give them a sense of who you are. A great example of that is if you're asked about dealing with conflict or managing somebody that you didn't get along with, and you have particular friendship dynamics or mentorship dynamics that you can reflect on in a way that show this is somebody who is thoughtful in every area of their life, and they're going to bring that to my company. I think it's really a wonderful way to flesh out what might be on your resume. So I know that was super high level and fast, but I did promise to leave some time for other questions. So I'm going to scroll through here and see if there's any I missed, but feel free to keep adding them. Okay, so I see a question around the skills that you develop in consulting. How do they transition to tech? Yes, any. I got some really wonderful skills out of my time in consulting. I learned how to manage up to my managers, to executives, to people who are far more senior than me. But I also learned how to project manage very complex priorities at the same time. And I use those skills every day as a product marketer now. I also think that public sector versus commercial consulting, I think from a subject matter perspective, we did have slightly different focuses, and our clients, obviously in the public sector, they were more concerned around achieving their mission than necessarily hitting a certain bottom line. But I think the skill set was largely the same. There was a huge emphasis on having data to support our arguments and being really good at PowerPoint. And again, all those things have translated really well to my role. What else? Okay. So I think we've tackled most of them here, but if you have any other questions or if anything else comes up, I will do my best to share with Jody a couple resources that I find useful when preparing for the interview process, and I'll make sure that she has that so she can share it with you, and then I'll find a way to share that on my LinkedIn too. Oh, I think we have something from Connor. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't